Hi, this is Stephen Brower from Raritan Valley Community College. This is for CSIT 256, Computer Architecture and Assembly Language. And this video is, this is for Irvine Chapter 8, and I want to take a look at INVOKE. Now, INVOKE, as a way of calling a procedure, it's something that is deprecated in 64-bit. And when an INVOKE is used, ADDR is used as one of the parameters. That's deprecated in 64-bit. In order for us to use a procedure that we're later going to invoke, we need a proto. Proto still exists in 64-bit, but not the parameters that we're going to see. The reason why we will go and take a look at this is for when we get to Chapter 11, which is on the Windows API. The library that the author has for 32-bit is more robust than the library for 64-bit, and so we'll be focusing on the 32-bit. We will have some asides later in 64-bit. I'm working on a 64-bit project to load up in the canvas, and I'll announce that when that is up and ready. Because we're going to be using INVOKE for the procedures in Chapter 11, I want to take a look at us using it. Now, if I pop over to Canvas for a second, and boy, the view of this might change between now and the time that you guys look at it, but some stuff, I mean, it might be arranged, but rearranged, but let me just point out a couple of things. So, there is a video that goes through showing using registers as parameters and using the stack as parameters. That video it references these two files here, the demo register proc, the demo stack proc, which in this case they're both the same sample program but written differently. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the demo invoke proc. And the demo invoke proc is the same program as the register and the stack one. It is just rewritten using the invoke. And one of the things, let me just back up a second in case you're looking out of order. These part 1 and part 2 video here, where I manually wrote two procedures, one for getting input from the user and one for displaying values to the user. These two videos here did those from scratch. And so what I eventually got to were two procedures that use registers as parameters. The two procedures I focused on there will look at something similar, but using the invoke. So the invoke, and we're right here looking in main, and invoke is another way of doing call, except it takes parameters. Similar to the way that a method call in Java would receive parameters, we can pass parameters. We can do the similar thing here using the invoke. And so one thing, if you take a look here, I'm calling this getDec from user twice, and I'm passing a two different set, these are two different calls. Here, the address of the length prompt, well, the ADDR is the invoke equivalent of offset. So in the demo where I loaded EDX with the offset of what the prompt was, here by doing ADDR, it is the prompt. Oh, by the way, strange thing about the invoke, there is a comma before the first parameter. It just freaks me out. I'm not used to it. I'm used to only a comma being between parameters, but there's a comma. It also means if you have the invoke and there's no parameters, there's a comma at the end. That just freaks me out. Anyway, sorry. So this getDec from user, the address, the first part is being used for the prompt. Now, the second part here, this is the address is for the variable that is going to receive the data. So in the demo, the part 1, part 2 demo I did where I wrote those from scratch, I used, I forget whether it was ESI or EDI. I used one of them, ESI or EDI, as being the register that hold that held the offset of either apples sold or oranges sold. Well, if I jump down to the get deck from user, here are the parameters. And the syntax here is a little bit different. So p prompt is a pointer to a byte because that was the thing that points to the string that was going to be displayed. And if you notice here for the write string, we're loading EDX with this p prompt, which is the address. So the address will be loaded in EDX, and then we call the write string. If we look here at the pdeck, it points to a D word. Well, where that is used now, what we have to do temporarily is if I want to take what comes from the read deck, remember the values left in EAX, if I want to take that and stick it into memory, I'm going to have to use a register to temporarily hold on to that pointer. So the pdeck I load into EDI, and then here we're saying take the value in EX and load it into what EDI points to. Because we're using EDI and because we're using EDX, then that is why the EDX and the EDI are listed here in the uses. And then the EAX, because readdeck overwrites EAX, that's in the uses as well. So the registers that we are using within this procedure are listed in the uses prompt. Okay, now the strange thing, so first of all, this part here, we just have the parameters, but otherwise it looks like a procedure. The calling of it, so instead of call in the name of the procedure, it's invoke in the name of the procedure, comma, and the parameters. So instead of us having to write 3 lines of code, in other words, load EDX with the offset of length prompt, load EDI with the offset of length rectangle, on a single line, we're passing our parameters. In order for the invoke to work, we need a forward declaration that it's going to be defined elsewhere, and that's the proto. So up top, before the data segment, this get deck from user proto, this is basically saying later in the code we are going to see a procedure, and we're going to be invoking this procedure, and this is like the prototype. So proto, by the way, still exists in 64-bit, but the parameters that proto has do not exist in 64-bit. And one of the things that we ran into, and I'm not sure whether it's a Microsoft Assembly issue, is that if the names of the parameters are too different, then it doesn't recognize them as being the same. And so what I would do is when I was writing them, I would write the procedure first. After I get the procedure written with the parameters, I copy and paste the procedure statement up top here and change proc to proto. And I would remove the uses. But the proto is basically saying we're defining something that's being done further down. Now, the display decimal. So in the demo for part 1, part 2, where I wrote from scratch these procedures, one of the ones was we loaded EAX with the value to display, and we loaded EDX with the offset of the prompt to display. Well, here, this display deck that we're doing, this ADDR length label, that's going to be the same as the offset. This is the address of what's being displayed. But this right here, this is a pass by value. So with rectangle is the memory value we have. That value is being passed. So if I look down at the display deck and I look at the parameters, so the first one, it's a pointer to a byte because that's pointing to the string that's being displayed. The second one is just a D word. That's just the value that we're receiving. So later on the write deck, that value is being loaded in EAX in order for it to be displayed. Similarly to the prompt, that the pointer is being loaded in EDX and then write string is called. For this procedure here, since EDX is being used here and EAX is being used here, that's why they're being listed in the uses statement. And once again, because this procedure we are calling by using the invoke, then up top we have to have the proto for it. And so the proto is the prototype for saying what the procedure looks like. The run of this is the same as the run for the other two, which is, or they did run it. And so if I do, I don't know, 10 and 25, then the area of the rectangle is 250. Woohoo, woohoo. So again, this, just a reminder, INVOKE is being deprecated in 64-bit. The reason why we're taking a peek at it is because in Chapter 11, we're going to be dealing with the 32-bit API, and we're going to be using INVOKE for dealing with the 32-bit API. And that's the main reason why this thing that's being deprecated is what we're looking at. Well, that's the main reason why we're looking at it. That's INVOKE and Proto in ADDR.